Now, you may have been there. You're with someone who you know deeply cares for you. They're expressive, supportive, and every sign points toward genuine love. And yet, despite all that, there's this thing. They sometimes pull back or even ignore you. Maybe it's not blatant or dramatic. They're not disappearing entirely, but it's there, subtle or not, that feeling of distance. You're left wondering why, in a relationship where there's such deep care, they sometimes act like you don't exist. Why does the person who loves you so much ignore you so often? Well, let's explore this question because I think the answer is multi-layered, and understanding it might just give you some clarity and peace of mind. First, let's consider one possibility that might not have crossed your mind. Sometimes, the more a person loves you, the more they need to protect their own sense of independence and individuality. We all know that relationships require closeness and connection, but they also require space for each person to stay grounded in who they are. For someone deeply invested in a relationship, it can be frightening to lose that balance. Love can feel vulnerable. It means opening yourself up to someone else and letting them into your world, which can sometimes be overwhelming. They don't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because they do, and sometimes that love requires them to retreat and recharge, so they don't feel like they're losing themselves. Think about it this way. For some people, independence is something they've worked hard for. Maybe they're used to being on their own, and being in love is new territory. They might not even realize they're pulling back. It's like a reflex, a protective measure to keep a firm grip on their individuality. It's as though they're saying, I want to be close to you, but I also need to know that I'm still my own person. It doesn't mean they don't want you in their life. It's just that they need time to reconcile these feelings. And part of doing that is through a little distance. Another thing to consider is that love, as beautiful as it is, can bring up insecurities. We all have wounds or insecurities that resurface when we're truly vulnerable with someone. Being with someone who truly matters to them may trigger a fear of inadequacy or self-doubt that they'd otherwise be able to avoid. This fear can make them withdraw, not as a conscious choice, but as a way of grappling with these emotions. It might seem strange, but sometimes the depth of their feelings makes them question their own worthiness. They might wonder, am I good enough? Or what if I mess this up? So, they create some emotional space as a way to process those feelings privately. They might even feel embarrassed about their vulnerability, and distancing themselves allows them a bit of relief from the pressure of their own self-doubt. There's also the reality that some people, particularly those who are naturally introspective or sensitive, need time alone to recharge. They're not pulling away from you specifically. They're pulling away from all external stimulation to rest and regain a sense of inner calm. This is especially true if your partner or loved one is the kind of person who feels deeply and has intense emotions. In such cases, even the most fulfilling connection can sometimes feel overwhelming, and they may need a break to recalibrate. This need for solitude can be difficult for a partner to understand, especially if they don't share the same need. But it's important to recognize that for some, time alone is not a reflection of how they feel about you. It's a matter of maintaining their own well-being. Let's also talk about another factor that may seem surprising: familiarity. We hear a lot about how familiarity breeds comfort, and that's absolutely true. But for some people, familiarity can also create a certain level of emotional numbness. When you're always around, when there's that unspoken understanding that you'll always be there, it's possible that they take that closeness for granted, almost without realizing it. This doesn't mean they don't value you. It's more that they start to perceive your presence as a constant in their life, something that doesn't require active attention every moment. It's like the air we breathe. We don't notice it because it's always there. Ironically, the more someone loves you and sees you as integral to their life, the more they may assume that closeness is a given, even if they're not consciously thinking about it. Another dimension to consider is personal stress or challenges that might have nothing to do with you. We all know that life can get overwhelming at times, with work, family obligations, or personal struggles that demand a lot of emotional bandwidth. When someone's dealing with these pressures, They may instinctively withdraw from those closest to them. They might feel they don't want to burden you with their struggles or believe that taking a step back will allow them to tackle these issues without affecting you. Of course, it's difficult not to feel affected when someone you care deeply about starts to ignore or distance themselves. But often, it's less about you and more about their own need to cope with their circumstances privately. In some cases, they might not feel ready to share these struggles openly, fearing judgment, or simply preferring to deal with them independently. And here's another side to it. Sometimes, people ignore the ones they love the most because of unresolved fears about relationships in general. They may have had past experiences where being close to someone led to pain, disappointment, or even betrayal. Even if they've come to love and trust you, those old fears and scars don't vanish. They may find themselves unintentionally pulling back to protect themselves from a possible hurt that might never come. It's not about you. It's a form of self-preservation. They're caught in this paradox of wanting to be close, but feeling a need to guard their heart. For them, distance is a way of keeping a safe zone, even when their intentions are to stay connected and committed. It's also possible that the one who loves you a lot may ignore you because they're not fully aware of how their behavior affects you. Some people have grown up learning that their emotions and actions don't always need to be explained to others, and they carry that into their relationships. They don't see their moments of withdrawal as a form of ignoring you. They see it as a necessary part of being themselves. In their mind, they might think, "This is just how I am," without realizing that their distance causes you to feel neglected. And because they're not fully aware, they might never address it unless it's brought to their attention. This is where open, gentle communication becomes so important. Often, people don't know the impact of their actions until it's pointed out to them in a way that's honest, but non-accusatory. In some cases, a person who loves you but seems to ignore you may actually be dealing with mental health challenges, such as anxiety or depression, which can complicate how they show up in the relationship. Mental health issues can often create a barrier between how they feel and how they're able to express it. For example, anxiety can cause them to overthink their words or actions, making them retreat because they're afraid of doing something wrong. Depression can lead to feelings of exhaustion or emotional numbness, causing them to seem distant or uninterested. When someone you love is struggling internally, their ability to connect with you may fluctuate based on how they're feeling in that moment. This can be incredibly challenging to deal with, but recognizing that their distance may stem from inner struggles can create a foundation of understanding rather than resentment. Ultimately, navigating a relationship with someone who loves you but sometimes ignores you requires both patience and self-awareness. On one hand, it's about understanding that their behavior likely isn't personal or a reflection of how they feel about you. But on the other hand, it's also essential to acknowledge your own needs and boundaries. Just because you understand why they're distant doesn't mean you have to be okay with it indefinitely. It's about finding that balance, loving and accepting them as they are, while also being honest about what you need in a relationship. So, what can you do if you're in this situation? First, open up a line of communication. Approach them with understanding rather than accusation. You might say something like, "I notice sometimes you pull back, and I just want to make sure everything's okay. I'm here to support you, and it helps me to understand what you're feeling." Sometimes, people don't know how to talk about what they're going through until they're invited to do so in a gentle way. And remember, no one's perfect. It's okay if they're still learning to navigate their feelings and boundaries within the relationship. And for yourself, practice acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you ignore your own needs. It just means you recognize that some of their actions stem from who they are. If you can accept them while also advocating for your needs, you'll have a much better chance at finding a fulfilling balance in the relationship. Ultimately, the people who love you may not always act in ways that feel perfect to you, and that's okay. Love is about growth, and growth isn't always easy or linear. The goal is to find a middle ground where both people can be themselves while still being present for each other. If you enjoyed this discussion, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell to stay updated on our latest videos. And, of course, feel free to share this with anyone who might find it useful. Thanks again. Stay strong, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next one.